Hey, do you have questions about how to start a freight brokerage or freight agency? Well, listen, good news. I just answered over 20 questions from my audience that will save you an enormous amount of time, frustration, and yes, money. Here we go. Betty Jones asks, can you use AI for bidding? Well, I think you can use AI for gathering market intelligence around rates, but I don't think, particularly in truckload, okay, if you're talking about full truckload or partials, it might be a little easy. LTL rates are much more automated and easier to do because they're class and weight driven, but full truckload and partials, I think you can gather market intelligence about that specific lane and that specific load and those specific requirements, but I don't think that quoting is there. I don't think AI quoting is there yet, right? You know, there's a lot of great data out there from different rating tools, whether you're using the DAT or whether you're using Truckstop. You know, there's a lot of great rating tools out there, and it gives you an idea of where the spot market is. But to use it as a rating tool as a broker, I just don't think the technology is there. And I'm not sure that it'll ever be there. But right now, it's definitely not there, in my opinion. You can use those rating tools to gather really good market intelligence, because what you have to do as a broker is you have to do what I call find the market. You got to find the spot market for that specific load. So if it's a van load going from Buffalo to Atlanta, that has a certain rate. There's a buy rate. What a truck is going to cost you for a full truckload from Buffalo to Atlanta for a van. Now, if we looked at that exact same lane for flatbeds, that rate would be different. And if we looked at that exact same lane for reefers, that rate would be different. So every piece of equipment, every type of load, every lane has a different spot market, and it varies from day to day. Now, there's usually not a huge amount of volatility in those spot market rates unless there's a weather event or some seasonality or a spike in fuel or something like that, right? Or we have some sort of global disaster, right? Something like that. But there's a little bit of flexibility in those spot rates. So, you know, I'm not sure that I would be comfortable or that I've seen a tool yet that will allow you to automate all your rating into AI. So, Betty, I hope that helps. That was a long, drawn out version of the answer, but I hope I gave a little bit of color and character and texture to it so that it would make more sense. Next question. How do you get a license and get the contracts? Okay, so getting a freight broker license is actually fairly simple. It's a process of filing your application with the FMCSA, getting a few requirements like a freight broker bond, getting your, you know, some of the other basics, you know, your UCR, your BOC3. There's some basic check marks that you got to go through. There's 4 or 5 things that you have to complete as a part of your application process. And then at that point, the FMCSA, you know, typically within 3 to 6 weeks will deem your authority active. You'll have an active broker authority. And then from there, you can start brokering loads, right? If you guys are looking for the specifics of how to become a broker, 7 simple steps to become a broker, go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/7 steps. Download that. It's going to give you a full breakdown. It's going to give you a walkthrough of the 7 steps that you need to go through in order to become a freight broker or a freight agent. Okay. It's geared towards broker, but I mean, a lot of that, there's a lot of crossover there, right? So if you download that, freightbrokerbootcamp.com/7 steps, you will get a download that you can take with you and use, write notes on or print out or do whatever you want. But it's a resource that's a roadmap on the 7 simple steps to become a freight broker. Okay. I think that'll probably help a lot. Now, the second part of the question, and get contracts. Okay. So there's a bit of a misnomer in the freight brokerage startup world where people think that everything is a contract, right? And that you get contracts with these shippers and that they guarantee you a certain amount of shipments, a certain amount of volume, a certain rate. And that's just not true. Most freight brokers operate in the spot market. And the spot market is not a contract. There's contract rates and there's spot rates. Contract rates are guaranteed for a certain term or a duration or a certain project length. Spot market is something where it goes up and down based on the spot market. So it's much more day to day. It's a short-term rate, typically within a week. Those rates are good for usually maybe up to a week, right? And then you may have to be re-rated potentially. So most brokers operate in the spot market. You're not focused on necessarily getting contracts, but you are focused on developing relationships with shippers, producers, manufacturers, distributors, right? People that have to ship products. So rather than thinking about it in terms of contracts, think about it in terms of relationships. So you do have to develop relationships with those clients, with those prospects, with those customers in order to start getting freight. freight, right? So you develop those relationships, you identify a need, you do some rating and quoting and some sourcing to make sure you have the capacity and the rates to be able to move the freight. And then at that point, at some point, the shipper is going to decide to either give you an opportunity to move that freight or not. That process is called sales, right? There is no load board you're going to go to where you're going to be able to just bid on freight and hope that you're going to get a shipment. That's not real, okay? If you're going to build a real freight brokerage or a real freight agency, that's not real, okay? So there may be some small niches like car hauling or different stuff like that where that may or may not work. But in the bigger scheme of things, as far as building a highly successful and highly profitable freight brokerage, I've never seen a broker build a successful business on trying to, just do rates online. You have to learn the process of selling. You have to learn the process of developing relationships. That's the reason why I put together my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator program. I have two programs. I have the Freight Broker Bootcamp Startup Program, which brings you from kind of A to Z as far as learning what a broker is, how to become a broker, how to get set up, how to start that process, and start making a little bit of money. And then I have a secondary program, which is called my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator program. That's the link you see on the screen. That's freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist. Now that program is a sales specific oriented training program. It's a coaching and mentoring program. Currently that program is sold out. You can't get access to it, but you can get on the wait list. So that program, I put over 1,000 students through that program. We've had a lot of great success stories. And that's where I take that piece of my brain all about freight broker sales. And I teach you my best freight broker sales strategies, tactics, tools, and my entire system that allowed me to do over $200 million of freight brokers. So again, there's two programs, the Freight Broker Bootcamp. You go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com, that's startup. And then we have the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator where you go to the wait list and you can sign up for the Sales Accelerator. Okay. As far as the wait list goes, right? You can't get access to it right now. Again, it's sold out. Spots will probably open up for that program maybe in the next 3 to 6 weeks. Okay. But you got to be on the wait list to get notified so that you know when spots open up, because those spots sell out like that. Okay. I hope that helps. I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, let me know. Marisol asks, what do you think about all the technology and future freight brokering and the future of the industry? I think that technology is a necessary evil, and not even a necessary evil. I think it's a huge added benefit. Let me explain to you why. When freight brokerage started back in the 80s, the internet didn't even exist. Okay. They used to post these loads in truck stops, like they had a board, and when you go into a physical truck stop, that's how a carrier knew to call on a load. Okay. And then the advent of the internet came around, and then load boards became a tool. And that had been a primary tool of brokerages for a long time, brokers and carriers, where they could go online and these load boards are a hub that connects carriers and shippers and has a lot of data, right? And then, we've gotten some enhanced technology, right? Now that the internet has gotten even bigger and now AI and machine learning have come into it, now we have even more enhanced tools. So I think that what's going to happen is, I've been giving this a lot of thought. I think that in business in general, what you're going to think about, and just hear me out, because I'm fleshing out this whole concept and I just want to kind of share it with you real quick. Okay. So it's a work in progress. If you look at kind of the corporate structure of a business, it looks like a pyramid. You've got a CEO at the top, and then you've got some upper level management, and then you got some mid-level management, you got some lower level management, you have a lot of doers in between, right? A lot of people that work in those departments, whether that be marketing or whether that be accounting or whether that be operations or shipping or whatever. Okay. Just thinking about a business. Okay. So I think what AI and machine learning and this advanced technology is going to do is it's going to turn that upside down, where it's now going to be more of a triangle this way. So you're still going to have like a CEO or a business owner, and they're going to have a group of executives and highly skilled people that they trust and that are highly skilled. And then as we move down more, there's going to be less people. And I say that because the jobs that are going to be taken predominantly by AI are jobs that, task type jobs, especially in the brokerage side. So maybe it's scheduling an appointment. That will eventually be very automated. It's already becoming more automated. Scheduling a pickup or delivery appointment, right? That would be a welcome task to a freight broker to have AI automate that. Check calls, where you're calling carriers and checking on loads, those types of activities, right? So there's a lot of activities in the brokerage world where, it could be automated efficiently. But the role of a broker, or the role of that person that really understands and manages that process, consider them kind of the quarterback, and then they've got an offensive line, and they've got running backs, and they've got wide receivers. Those are kind of the AI. So I can envision a time where you will be able to have a small brokerage with 10 or 20 employees that might be doing $1 billion a year in sales by having really strong people at the top and then deploying AI and deploying technology below them to help with automation and to help with those daily activities that take up a lot of time. And so, yeah, some workers will be displaced. The people that are at the kind of the bottom of the food chain as far as the work being done, maybe even some of the accounting stuff, right? Collecting on bills or sending out invoices or following up on past due invoices. I mean, those sorts of activities, I see those sorts of activities being disrupted by AI, but I don't see the role of a broker itself being disrupted by AI. Okay. Just like I don't see the role of a CEO of a business being disrupted by AI. So I'm working on this concept and, I've been kind of doing some research and giving it some thought, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. I think that AI, let's not even talk about AI, let's just talk about technology in general. If you embrace technology, it can be your best friend. If you stick your head in the sand, it can totally be to your demise. Okay. Think about the whole Blockbuster example, right? Everybody had a Blockbuster video in their town, right? Especially if you're my age in your 50s. There was thousands and thousands and thousands of Blockbuster videos. And then the internet came around and they decided to put their head in the sand. And there was a little company, little startup called Netflix. And then Netflix came in and basically just ate their lunch. And almost overnight, Blockbuster pretty much went out of business and went bankrupt. And so they put their head in the sand and didn't believe what was going on. But had they embraced the technology, they could have been well above and beyond anything that Netflix had ever imagined because they had such a lead. They had such an advantage, right? So what you don't want to do is you don't want to put your head in the sand from a technology perspective. You don't want to ignore it. You want to leverage it. It doesn't mean you have to do everything with technology, but as technology evolves, try to create efficiencies inside your business that, number one, serve the customer, and number two, serve you. Okay. So I hope that helps. I'm still waiting for my license to come through, but Truckstop has hit me up to set up an appointment to talk about what they offer. Do you recommend Truckstop over DAT? I think they're both great. I use them both. I had them both for years. Okay. I had subscriptions to both. I think ultimately, as you grow, you'll probably end up with both. Probably the easiest, the one that I think is offering the best deal right now, and the one that I think is probably best for startups, to be honest with you, I'm going to put it in a chat here. I'm going to put it in a banner. I just had a conversation with those guys recently, and I really like what they're doing. Okay, so if you go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/loadboard, they have like some promos and some different, like you get 20% off. So there's different promos and stuff that they have. I like both Truckstop and DAT. I've worked with both. I have relationships with both. They're both partners of mine. I refer them to my clients. I refer them to my students. But right now, I think that as a startup, I'd probably go to Truckstop. Use that link, freightbrokerbootcamp.com/loadboard, and that'll bring you to their best promo that they have running at the time. Okay, Andre asks, how can I stay competitive with rates, especially in the hotshot market, without selling myself short? Any pointers for pricing strategy when you're trying to win that first lane? Okay, well, there's a couple of things that come to mind, Andrea, and that is, number one, don't try to be the cheapest. You don't want to be the Walmart of freight brokerage, okay? So you have to learn to sell value. You have to learn how to differentiate yourself. You basically have to learn how to stand up for yourself when they come in and tell you that you're $200 high, or that you're $100 high, or that whatever number high you are, right? You have to be able to stand your ground, as opposed to what most brokers do, which is just give in and say, well, where do I need to be in order to get the freight? That's what most brokers do, because they're weak salespeople. They don't stick to their guns. They don't sell value. All right. So you have to learn to stand up for yourself and not focus on being the cheapest. With all that being said, okay, that should be your first course of action. Sell value. After that, you're going to get a certain level of response, and you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other. You're going to have to make a decision. Are you willing to compromise your rates? Are you willing to negotiate your rates? Are you willing to reduce your rates to a certain level in order to get that client? Now, I do believe that having kind of what I call a loss leader can be a great strategy for getting new clients, especially if they're higher volume clients where there's a big upside because there's a lot of lanes and a lot of opportunities to line up for what you specialize in. So what that means is this. Let's say, for example, you quoted $2,000 and they told you they needed to be at $1,700, right? It's a pretty big delta there, $300 delta. It's hard to sell value on that unless you can really differentiate yourself. But what you don't want to do is just necessarily come down to $1,700. So I would say reducing your rates on getting that first lane or two moving can be a smart strategy, as long as you don't just immediately go from $2,000 to $1,700. If you sell value value, and then you use what I call maybe like a trial close after you've sold value, which something like maybe like if I would you, like where it's a potential where you say, Andrea, if I could get closer to that 1700, I can't guarantee that we're going to get there, right? Because that's a pretty big delta, right? But we really want to earn your business. Would you be willing to give us an opportunity? So that's what I call a trial close. And if they say, no, you have to beat the 1700, then I now know where I need to be. If they say yes, now I also know where I need to be, and I have to make a judgment as to, am I willing to drop? But I wouldn't have done any of that until after I had sold value. And selling value is what makes you different, right? Your experience is how you vet carriers, is the carrier relationships you have, the customer relationships you have, your service policy. Do you hang up the phone at 5 o'clock, or are you going to pick up the phone at 11 or 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning? That's selling the value. I think the testimonials you have from past customers or from current customers, that goes a long way into selling value, right? There's that old adage, when you say it about yourself, it's bragging, but when someone else says it about you, it's proof. So I'm just brain dumping here, but I think the pricing strategy, I think that you're onto something there with maybe having a little bit of a loss leader, because here's what you have to understand about the freight business. And this is like a phenomenon that it's like 90+% true, right? Very rarely does it not come true. And that is, once you get that first load moved, if you do a good job and everything goes according to Hoyle with no problems, the probability of you getting another load is almost 100%. Okay. As long as you didn't drop the ball. Now you may not get a load the next day or the next week, but you'll get another load if you follow up and continue to develop that relationship. So breaking traction and getting that first load is the hardest part. Sell value and then make a decision as to where you're willing to negotiate to get that first lane moving, because you know that if you start moving that first lane and you do a good job, over time you'll be able to raise those rates up. And maybe you're not making 15 or 20% on that initially. Maybe you're only making 10% initially, right? But on that lane, you'll be able to negotiate those rates up slowly over time. Plus, you'll be able to expand into other lanes and other opportunities. And now that your foot's in the door, they're typically not going to beat you up as much on price, right? So you're going to have a little bit more flexibility. So I hope that helps, Andrea. I gave a little bit of a brain dump there. I hope that helps you. Good question. By any means, production asked, just got my authority up. Awesome. What comes first on the list, shippers or carrier? The answer is both, but let me qualify what I mean. Now that you've got your broker authority, you've got to identify what your niche is, okay? Because you don't want to be a jack of all trades, master of none. You want to start out in a smaller niche, like I did. Van, Northeast, outbound, right? So if it picked up in New York or PA, New Jersey, up through New England, and it went on a van and it went north, and it went west or south, that was my niche. And I'm just using that as an example, okay? So you identify your niche. As a part of that niche, while you're identifying that niche, you're going to want to do some due diligence, right? Some due diligence using the load board, using the internet, using whatever resources you can access to identify, particularly load boards, the carriers and the rates that are coming in and out of that market, depending upon your niche. So you're going to want to identify a list of shippers in that niche. So what we did is we figured out the different industries and the different types of companies and products that were shipping out of the Northeast. We made a list of them. And then we also identified who the carriers were that were going to major destinations. Like, for example, if it was Mass to Illinois, we knew who some of the carriers were. But we didn't have to know all the carriers, and we didn't have to have contracts with all those carriers before we started selling. So again, there's a certain amount of due diligence that you want to do, and then you have to engage. So after you've done that basic level of due diligence, I'm going to say you're going to have that list of shippers, and you're going to have to start calling customers. And the reason why you're really going to focus on customer relationships first is because those customers have specific needs. If you find a carrier that's operating out of Maine and you've got shipments going out of New Jersey, that carrier in Maine is probably not going to do you any good because there's no synergy there, right? They don't line up. But if you find a shipper out of New Jersey, just a hypothetical, and it's shipping from, New Jersey to Ohio, hypothetically, right, on a van, you're going to need to find a specific van carrier that has a truck available in New Jersey or the surrounding area that wants to go near Ohio. And so that's where the load boards are going to come. Most of your new carrier relationships that you develop when it comes to startup are going to come from loads that you're posting on the load boards, right? And then you're going to develop relationships with those carriers. And then you can call on those carriers without posting a load anytime you have another load that matches their need, if that makes sense. So the short answer to that is you're going to do due diligence on shippers and carriers in your niche, but then you're going to focus on developing relationships with shippers first. And then you're going to backfill the carriers based upon that shipper's specific needs, whatever their equipment type, whatever their lanes, and so on. Okay? So I hope that helps. If you were a new freight agent in dry van niche, what products would you move? Tons of stuff go on dry vans. I mean, everything from building materials, that aren't necessarily side loaded, stuff that can be loaded from a dock, to bottled beverages, to food, to textiles, to paper. There's so many different products that can be put on a van, right? The key is that the types of products that go on a van can't typically be exposed, okay? Meaning they can't go on a flatbed. You're not going to tarp them. So anything that can't necessarily go on a flatbed can go on a van in some way, shape, or form. And it's typically, most van freight is palletized, right? So it's going to be on a pallet. Not always, but most freight is palletized. So there's all kinds of different industries, tons of industries, from consumer goods to electronics to food to beverages to, almost anything you could think of. Okay. It's a very big, there's a lot of different industries and products that go on vans. And by the way, if you guys are looking for that load board, here it is right there. Again, freightbrokerbootcamp.com/load board. That's where you get the special deal on Truckstop. Chase Cho asks, cold emails versus calls. It's not an either or, it's both. I'm a big believer in having what I call a multi-channel outreach strategy. So cold calls, emails, LinkedIn, face-to-face, and even direct mail sometimes, okay? Where you're sending out a letter or some sort of a package of some sort. I mean, it really depends. Yeah, I'm a big believer in a multi-channel outreach strategy, because here's the reality, Chase. If you and I sat down with a list of 1,000 prospects and you were only going to use the phone and I was going to use phone, email, LinkedIn, okay, and face-to-face, I'm going to make more contacts than you, because you're limited to just the phone. Because certain people are not going to pick up the phone. They're not responsive on the phone. They're hard to get on the phone, but they'll respond to email or LinkedIn, or if you drop in face-to-face. So I'm a big believer in having a multi-touch point outreach strategy, because it's going to double or triple your connection rate. And this is all about, it's a contact sport, right? We need to talk to people. We need to start a dialogue. And so I don't think it's an either or. Now, if you're asking me which one, should you send a email out before you call? I think that can be a good strategy if you've got the proper messaging for both, right? And again, that's where the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator comes in, right? The problem that most people have when it comes to sales is they try to use these old school generic sales scripts like, hey, I'm a freight broker. I got trucks in your area. I wonder if we can help you out. Or, hey, I'm a freight broker. We can save you money. I wonder if we could do some freight quotes. Or, hey, I'm a freight broker. We have access to thousands of trucks. Wonder if we could move some of your freight, right? All these old school, generic, stale, outdated sales scripts that you've probably heard a million times before. So the key here, if you want to be treated different, you got to be different. So you got to have what I call a compelling sales hook. You got to have a way to differentiate yourself from all the other brokers that are using those old school. And it's not really hard, but people are lazy and they don't know how. And so that's why I put together, one of the primary reasons I put together the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator is because I saw so many people struggling with sales and getting shippers. And it's just not that hard if you speak right language and you learn how to differentiate yourself. That's the reason why I put that together. So if you guys are curious about that, you want details, you want to get on the wait list, go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist for the Sales Accelerator. If you're looking for the startup program where you're just, hey, I'm just looking to get started as a broker and agent, go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Okay. That's a different program. Okay. So I hope that helps. Cynthia, have I ever used Trucking Planet? No, I've heard of them, but I've never used them. What are you trying to use them for? Top Up Brokerage says, I was not able to quote some shippers because they required insurance, general, contingent, auto, errors, emissions to be onboarded. Should I get these or find other shippers? It's very hard for me to answer that question because it depends upon where you are in your business. If you're in true startup mode, I would say probably not, okay? Because there are tons of shippers out there. The heavy majority of shippers don't require any or all of that, okay? Right? But what I would do is I would get some, it depends on your financial situation. It depends upon your experience level. It depends upon your risk tolerance is really what it comes down to. But I strongly suggest if you're in startup mode, probably not focusing in on those clients that heavy restrictions as far as insurance requirements, and then finding shippers that are a little bit easier to deal with. But you could always backfill those when the time is right, when you're in a different position financially, maybe you've got better cash flow, maybe you're ready to, to invest some of that into those types of tools in order to acquire shippers. I did not start my business out with contingent cargo. I never had errors and omissions the entire time I had the brokerage. And, we were able to build a very successful business. Eventually, we did end up getting contingent cargo after we had been moving freight with other shippers for a while. And then we decided, we ran into a shipper that we really liked. We had developed good rapport with them. They told us if we had gotten contingent cargo that they would guarantee us freight. and we got contingent cargo, and then we used that customer to finance the cost of that contingent cargo. And then we were able to leverage that amongst other new customers as a way to get their business as well. So I hope that helps. Seamus, from the time you received your authority, how long until you booked your first load? So from the time that we started operations, I'm going to give you that date. Okay. From the date we started operations was the first week of January. I think we definitely moved our first shipment within 2 weeks. Okay. Now that's not always the case. I've had students that have moved shipments their first week. I've had students that have taken months to move their first shipment. Okay. I had one student, it took them like 6 months to move their first shipment. And then in the next 12 months after that, they did over $1 million in sales. Okay. So there's a lot of stories like that. And it's going to vary from person to person. But I think depending upon your background, depending upon how aggressively you're pursuing this, depending upon how good you are at following systems and actually following through on the steps that you need in order to get and support clients, I think anywhere between a couple weeks and a couple months is realistic. That's why I tell everybody have a little bit of cash sitting in the background to make sure that you can pay those bills while you're waiting on your first shipments. But you have to understand, when you first start this business and you go operational, you've got a prospect like your life depends on it, because it really does. And again, you need to get that cash flow is like oxygen. And we all know what happens. If we don't have oxygen, we die. And if a business doesn't have cash flow for too long, it dies. So I hope that helps. Seamus, good question. Prerequisites for becoming a freight agent, since many brokerages in the United States demand knowledge of TMS, load boards, and cargo management. Do you have any demonstration tutorials? It's impossible for me to teach TMS and load boards because the load boards and TMSs have their own uniqueness. And what you need to do is they will provide the training for you. So if you sign up, for example, for XYZ TMS, that TMS is going to function differently than ABC TMS. The core components will be the same, but where you're going to click and how you're going to navigate and how they do it is a little bit different. So any type of training specific to TMS or load boards, you're going to have to get from that TMS or load board provider, right? As far as cargo management, I'm not sure if you're thinking about some sort of specific software, but that's usually done in the freight brokerage world. It's done with the TMS. As far as any specific demonstration tutorials, I don't have any of that because, again, that would be specific to a specific provider. So when you sign up with a provider, whatever TMS, they're always going to have tutorials and trainings and teaching you how to use that technology, whether it be a CRM or whether it be a load board or whether it be a TMS. They always have training associated with it, and they onboard you with that as a way to retain you as a client and help you feel as though that your investment has been valuable so you can get a return on investment with that tool that you're using. So I hope that helps. Kevin has a question. New MC carrier. Would someone want pictures of equipment before sending a carrier packet? Spidey Sense says scam. Just watch the carrier packet video. Well, brokers and carriers are being much more careful when it comes to vetting providers, whether you're vetting a broker or whether you're vetting a carrier. So I don't think it's unrealistic to be cautious. I'm not sure what a picture is going to do, right? Necessarily, unless you have a newspaper that you're holding up with a date on it or something. I don't know exactly how that would work. Can you elaborate on that, Kevin? I really don't know where you're going. Are you a carrier? Are you a broker? What are you most concerned with? And what's the issue of sending a picture? Who cares if you send a picture? What's it going to do to you, right? I don't know. Prince Hulk, do you know when the ED-205 is shipped to Tony's Fire Station Center? No, I don't. I have no idea. I don't even know what you're talking about. Okay, question from My Trucking Life. How much cash needed on hand to finance and pay for your first shipment? There's 3 ways you can finance your first shipment. One is you can use your own finances, your own cash. Secondly, you can use your own credit. And third, you can use factoring. Now, factoring is like an alternative financing where they advance you the money for the shipment, even though the shipper hasn't paid the invoice. So if you bill a shipper $1,000 and you have a factoring company, they'll advance you like $900 to $950 so you can pay the carrier and some basic operating expenses. And then when they get paid the balance, they'll send you the difference minus their fees. Okay. So you can do one of those 3. A typical full truckload shipment is going to be somewhere between probably $1,000 and $2,000 total cost to the truck, realistically, depending upon the type of shipment. It could be more if it's a longer haul or a more complex, but as a general rule, full truckload probably falls fall in that 1,500 to maybe 2,000 range. Okay. So the reality is, to move the first shipment, if you didn't have a factoring company, what would happen is you would invoice the shipper upon delivery. Once the carrier gives you the bill of lading and their invoice, you would invoice the shipper, and then you're going to have to wait for them to pay you. You either wait for them to pay you and assume they're going to pay you on time, and then you pay the carrier, or if you have your own finances, then you use your own finances to pay that carrier before it's due. Most carrier invoices are due in 30 days, just like most shipper invoices are due in 30 days. So you can see how if a shipper doesn't pay you fast enough, you can't have the money to pay the carrier. But if the shipper pays you quicker, you got the money to pay the carrier. So you have to be prepared either with factoring or with your own financing to be able to pay those invoices. Most people use factoring because it's what I call OPM, other people's money, right? So there's a little bit of a cost to it, but it allows you to get the business moving along and start generating cash flow without fear of not being able to pay your carriers on time. So I hope that helps. Ibrahim, hey, I started my brokerage this year and got a few customers, but their insurance requirements are a bit high. Because of that, I pay $18,000 a year. Is that normal? No, it's not normal. I'm going to tell you right now, I ran a brokerage that at one point before I sold it was doing over $80 million a year. And I would tell you that our total insurance costs for contingent cargo, general liability, and all the insurance that we had was less than $5,000 a year. Okay. So is $18,000 excessive? Yeah, for sure. I don't know what special requirements they have. I don't know what type of business you're doing with them. I'm sure that there are certain clients that have certain insurance requirements, but if you're in a startup mode, that cash that you're spending sounds like it's kind of choking you and it's constraining you from growing your business. Imagine what you could do with $18,000 in cash to generate new clients that don't require that type of insurance. So I'm not telling you to drop your clients. I'm just telling you to evaluate how you invest your hard-earned money, because that can be invested into growth, or it could be invested into something like you're doing, which is not giving you a whole lot of growth. Probably not a whole lot of profit, at least, because it's hard to make up that amount of insurance cost. It seems extremely excessive to me, considering, I did well over $200 million as a freight broker, ran a brokerage, been in the industry for well over 20 years. So yeah, I'd say that's excessive and unusual. I've never heard of anybody paying $18,000 in insurance for a freight brokerage. Ever. Hope that helps. Okay. But now you clarified your surety bond is different. Okay. If you're building your surety bond cost into that, that's not insurance. Okay. Surety bond is not insurance. Your surety bond is a different cost. You said something like you mentioned here, insurance company, PFA, transportation, insurance, and surety service. Surety bond is different than insurance. So surety bond is going to be heavily based on your credit. I don't know what your surety bond cost is. Most people, if you have decent credit, it's probably falls somewhere between $1,000 and maybe $4,000 for a surety bond. If you have bad credit, then it's going to go up from there. It could go up to 5 or 8 or 10,000 or more for your surety bond. That I don't know, right? But you're talking about insurance. I'm talking about general liability, contingent cargo, errors and omissions, things of that nature. That's insurance. Surety bond is not insurance. Okay, so I hope that helps. Seamus, what's the typical time frame for paying a carrier on a shipment? Depends on when they want to get paid. Typical credit terms are 30 days. That's very normal credit terms. They get paid in 30 days from the day they invoice you and provide you a signed bill of lading. They get paid 30 days after, not from the delivery date, but from when you get the invoice and the signed BOL. Okay. That's when the clock starts ticking. Typically it's 30 days. They may say, hey, listen, or you may be able to offer them an incentive like, hey, listen, we'll do a quick pay where we'll pay you, in 3 days, but we're going to deduct 2% off the invoice, right? That's a way for you to put some extra profit in your pocket if you want to do or have the ability to do quick pays. But typical credit terms are 30 days with carriers. Same with shippers. Okay. So Kevin clarified, I'm a carrier, brokers asking for W-9, putting them on COI and pictures of plates before even discussing price. Yeah, Kevin, I wouldn't even bother doing any of that. If you can't find their broker MC, if you go to the FMCSA or go to Truckstop or wherever, if you can't find them, you got to vet them first before you start providing them all this information. Okay. I wouldn't provide them all that information until I have fully vetted them as well. So I hope that helps. Yeah, Ibrahim, this is some very specialized freight and heavy duty requirements. So yeah, that's a business decision you have to make. Is it worth the investment? The only person who can answer that is you. But I can tell you, in all the years that I did brokerage and in all the years that I've consulted with clients, I've never had a client ever, or myself, who have ever invested $18,000 into insurance to get a client or anywhere near that. But that's a decision you can make. If you're turning that $18,000 into $180,000 and you're getting a 10x return on your investment, well, then it's probably a good deal, right? But if you've invested $18,000 and you haven't gotten a return and you're losing money just to do business with that client, well, then it probably doesn't make sense in the big scheme of things. Question, do I need cargo insurance to register apply as a broker? No. I have your flow chart from bootcamp that shows getting insurance after applying for broker, but I hear questions about getting it or not. No, brokers are not required ever before or after when they get their authority to have cargo insurance, ever. It's an optional coverage and it's called contingent cargo, okay? Brokers don't get primary cargo. That's the primary cargo is covered by the truck, by the carrier. They have cargo insurance. That's the primary cargo. You can get contingent cargo, but it's totally optional and it's totally not required at all. Most brokers start without it. Some brokers never have it. Some brokers will adopt it over time based upon opportunity or, what they want to reinvest in their business. Question for My Trucking Life. I have my authority since January and have been looking at a TMS software. When would you recommend getting a TMS, or do I even need it? You will need a TMS when you start moving loads. If you're not moving loads, then you probably don't need the expense of a TMS right now. You could move your first 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 loads on paper or on a spreadsheet if you want it, okay? Now, once you start moving regular freight, you're going to want a TMS. You're going to need to be able to more efficiently track and manage that freight, and you're going to need a more efficient way to track and manage your accounting components of it, right? Billing. You're going to need a more efficient way to do that once you start moving predictable freight. But your first 5 or 10 loads, you don't even need it. You could just do it on an Excel spreadsheet or in a folder on paper. You really don't need anything high tech. You will need access to a load board, right? Which is different than a TMS, but sometimes they're connected where you'll post your loads in a TMS and it'll automatically post to different load boards. That's a feature that most load boards have. But yeah, you don't absolutely need it at the outstart, but once you start moving freight, you're going to want to get one. Rosemary, can you be a broker and handle the business from home? Yes, 100%. Most freight brokers and freight agents operate from home. That's one of the greatest parts about it. No commute, right? You get the convenience of working from your own office at home, whether that be your kitchen table, whether that be your living room, whether that be your office setting like you have here. You need a computer, phone, and internet. That's basically what you need, and a desk and a chair. Yeah, so you can absolutely start from home. I would say 95% of all of my students that have started a successful freight brokerage started from home. Now, some of them later migrated into an office setting, but remote work is becoming much more acceptable now than ever. So I have brokers who have larger businesses and agents who have larger businesses that their staff is all remote and they don't even need an office. So hope that helps. Good question, Rosemary. Gina, do you have a company you work with for contingent cargo or that you recommend? I don't currently have a company like that. I'm actually vetting a couple of companies right now for contingent cargo to recommend, but I'm very careful when it comes to recommending any sort of vendors. So I currently don't have anything. Rosemary, if you need help to start, go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com. You can sign up and get instant access to the training, and we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. Can't make it any easier than that, okay? You can get started with a 1-year gold membership to bootcamp for $185. Plus, we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee, okay? So that's your best option. Question from Mike. When a driver en route has a breakdown and is unable to reach the receiver, do we bill the shipper for the cross-dock charges, or is it on us? That's a good question. In most cases, you, the broker, are going to be responsible. You and the carrier are going to be responsible for getting that load from A to B. The shipper, if they decide to, can consume that charges to make sure that the freight gets there, but it's not their responsibility, right? You, the broker and carrier, accepted that shipment and said you were going to get it to the destination. So in most cases, you or a combination of you and the carrier are going to eat that cost. Anything that a shipper does on that is purely good faith on their part. Rosemary, if you're looking for the website, here, freightbrokerbootcamp.com. You go there, it'll take you 60 seconds to get enrolled. You'll get an email with your logins. And then from there, you can log in and access all of the training 24/7, 365 access. Okay. And you have online support, and we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money back guarantee. So listen, guys, that's going to wrap it up for today. I was only going to spend a half hour. You guys asked really good questions, so I'm proud of you. We spent an hour doing Q&A. If you guys got value out of this, if you learned anything, if you want me to come back and do these types of Q&As in the future or these live trainings, hit me up in the comments. First of all, hit the like button no matter where you're at. If you're on LinkedIn, if you're on Facebook, if you're on YouTube, wherever you're at, hit the like button and hit me up in the comments and let me know 1 to 10. Was this valuable? 1, Dennis, this was terrible. It sucked and it was a waste of my time. 10, I loved it. I'll be back for more and I really appreciate you answering those questions. If it's anything less than an 8, just give me a reason. Tell me why, okay? I did my best. I hope I gave you guys some valuable answers. On YouTube, I have, I think, over 300 free training videos that you guys can consume for zero, right? And again, we do have the Freight Broker Bootcamp Startup Program, which is on the screen. If you're looking for someone to hold your hand and give you a system from A to Z, how to become a freight broker, freight agent in 30 days or less. I've put over 10,000 students through that program. And again, we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money back guarantee. So I hope that helps. Give me some feedback. Awesome. Good feedback. You're welcome. Eclectic Rose, you're welcome, as always. Coleman, you're welcome. Thank you. Wow, great feedback. Thank you. Okay, cool. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for being here. I'll be back Monday with another Freight Broker Bootcamp Live every Monday at noon. Put it in your calendar, put it in your phone, and I'll see you guys next Monday on the next Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. Seamus said, great value with learning. Thanks. Yep. Awesome. There's only one Seamus. All right, my friend. Seamus. I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much. Have an awesome day.